Dear Carol, Tom said to send this report to you. Maybe it'll help clear up a few things. The committee was composed of Tom McEwen, Woody Gilmore of Race Car Engineering, and Pete Ogden, who built Milani's car. After looking at the car, the film that was taken of the run and the crash, and then going out to the drag strip and seeing the site of the actual crash, we feel the following probably took place.
American car culture has found its way all around the world. It's a national treasure that has gone global and soaked deep into just about every aspect of modern life, and most people don't even know it. I'm Dan Stoner, and I've spent my life searching for the legends of underground car culture hidden in plain sight, and telling their stories that nobody else can. Some you might be familiar with, some you might not. These are the stories you've heard of, but have never actually heard. This is the Motor Underground.
When you build a hot rod, two things can make it or break it: the stance and the motor. The personality of the car and what it looks like standing still is really what the stance is all about. But the motor backs up that personality. I mean, you kind of think of it like a street brawler. The stance is talking the talk, but the motor is walking the walk. So we finally reunited this motor with Bruno Giannoli, the guy who actually built the thing in 1962. And with the help of his son John, who's a master engine builder in his own right, we think we finally nailed its history.
I wonder if this was a fucking fueler.
It was set up for a fueler.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
So you measured the piston.
Yeah.
Okay. So we just found out another piece. It's a fueler motor. 50. These are rough estimates,
right?
But he's 55 down. So 55 down. It's a fueler motor. God, it's one of the first ones. We only made two like this, two girdles like this. You're gonna remember all this stuff, huh?
We got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he only made two. It's got 15 thousandths piston clearance. Down. Because normally when we do those, this dome will be up, out of the block.
Yeah. For gas, you mean?
For like a 9-to-1 compression motor.
Yeah.
So as you increase the stroke, you gotta put less dome.
Okay.
So he to get the compression down, he's down in the hole. You follow?
Yeah, I got you.
When Tim Condor and I finally reunited Bruno with this motor that he built 6 decades later, on the same shop floor that he built it on, it was just the greatest experience watching he and his son John, who I don't even think had been born when this motor was first built, decipher this thing and really uncover its mysteries.
Did you always bore the blocks when you got them new?
No.
So here's what they did. They took, it's just a bolt fell, it's all right. A bolt, this was one of the fuel blocks, because we know it's first designed, one of only a couple. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
It is an original fueler motor. It was a standard bore. He bored it 20 to clean it up and threw the stroke in.
When this was open, there was a 55-gallon drum right outside there. And we'd make a run, and the goat was famous because he'd buy like 5 or 6 sets of pistons at once. He had them in stock. So he'd, I don't like this, throw it in the fucking barrel, okay? In fact, I remember once we was gonna go to Long Beach, and I forgot the other one. So the goat goes, fuck, I ain't got no fucking pistons. So went in the barrel, and we got 8 pistons out of that thing, put the motor together, went to Long Beach, took fucking top eliminator, and the next day went over to, what's the fairgrounds? Pomona, and took top eliminator again with Denny Milani driving.
Whether it was the hash marks in the cylinder walls, or the way the valve train was set up, the way the heads were ported, the gasket between the pan and the bottom of the motor, the girdle itself. All of those pieces started telling their stories and coming to life again through the memories of Bruno and all of the experiences that he had with his friends way back then around this motor. And to have close friends there, Dave Tanamura, who helped introduce me to Bruno in the beginning, and Tim Condor, who was the designer of the car and helped me get the thing back into this motor and back into the car again, really could not have been a more magical day.
Did I tell you I took him to the doctor? And the guy's all, do you drink? He goes, well, I just have a little bit of booze in my coffee in the morning. And he's all, because at first he said no. And I said, yeah, he does. and he goes, do you smoke? He goes, no. I go, yeah, he does. and then he goes,
You like the interpreter.
so I'm in him with the fucking doctor, right? I'm into the doctor.
You gotta lie to your doctor.
Right? So the fucking doctor's looking, and mind you, these are all young guys down there at the veteran, because it's at Stanford. So it's all the doctors that graduated from Stanford and are serving their residency at the fucking veterans.
Yeah, right.
So they're all young guys. So they ain't never seen their fucking, this guy belongs in a museum, right? And fucking, so they're sitting there, right? And he goes, well, do you know how much proof? Because they're trying to adjust his medicine. And he goes, oh, hold on. And he pulls out a fucking bottle out of his pocket and hands it to the doctor. One of the airplane bottles. He's all, he looks at me, I said, but he doesn't drink. Yeah.
So this archaeological dig is really finally starting to make some sense. I mean, the good news is Terrible Ted never got rid of anything, so it's filled with some rare parts. And Bruno, the girdle that he made, really prevented the motor from coming apart over who knows how many races. But I don't want to be the one to ruin it. So now I got to find an engine builder and a machinist who will, stop laughing at me just long enough to help me rebuild the thing so it can live its new life aboard this old tin can. So we're heading down to Brendan Murray's shop. Now, Brendan, you have to know somebody to know Brendan. And most people in this world, especially in vintage drag racing world, know Brendan Murray, like the way they know the back of their hand. They're just like, oh yeah, Brendan. But if you don't know who he is, you'd never know that one of the best shops for vintage drag racing, building motors, building cars, painting helmets, is nestled kind of in the midst of a neighborhood in San Jose, California. It's just a very unassuming rancher. So I finally met him a couple years ago, all through vintage drag racing, and when people heard about the motor, they kept saying, well, where are you gonna take it? And I didn't know. And I kept hearing the name Brendan Murray. Why don't you call Brendan? So finally, I met Brendan at a lunch that Andy Brizio, one of the original organ grinders, put on, believe it or not. And he said, I heard about what you were up to. And he and I got to talking, and the next thing we know, I've got the motor down at his shop, or at least he's taking a look at it. And he said, bring it back, bring me the car, we'll put this thing together for you. And I understand what you're saying. That was a big deal for me, because most times when I told people what I wanted to do with this car and this motor, they just shut me down before I even really got started. You can't do that, right? Brendan didn't say that. He was the only one who never said that. He was the only one who didn't laugh me out of the room when I started talking about what I wanted to do. Plus, it helps that Brendan is a drag racer, a vintage drag racer. Slow the fuck down. Wait now. Follow it. Look in your mirror. Look at your mirror. What'd I do? B plus. B plus? Oh yeah, my bricks are all there. You didn't fly one to the house. Cadillac don't have a quarter panel on it. You did good. B plus isn't bad. I'll take that. That's probably the best grade I've ever gotten. B plus. B plus.
Hold the brake.
Get out from behind it.
We've done this so many times now.
Let me get a floor jack. It could work.
You could.
We push, I steer. You know, I can put you into a fine green Pontiac 66
Yeah, this-
GTO.
This could be a lot safer
It's
for
a nice
you.
girl's car.
Yeah, it's safer. You know, there's. It's got glass in the windows.
Yeah, heater,
Yeah,
air
heater.
conditioning.
Yeah.
Brakes,
Yeah.
brakes.
It's got
Well,
headlights. It's got
brake
brakes.
on all four corners.
Oh,
Yeah, it's gonna
And
be
a,
lot
and
easier.
a radiator.
And a radiator and an alternator. You can actually.
Also, you can drive more than a block. I think it'll be a good
Yeah.
project.
I'm glad you're saying that.
No, it's just, you know, again, like, there's a lot of issues that we can work around, but the more you look at it, the more you see where they were thinking. I mean, these cars are the most dangerous cars you can drive. I mean, there's a reason why they put the motor in the back on these cars, on the newer cars. If something happens on this, I'm the first guy to know it. You know, I've been on both ends of that, on the car running great and the car not running so great. And, you know, that danger factor, you know, several of us have had this discussion. You know, it's kind of nice to look at death in the face every week and kick its ass, you know. It's one of those things that there's a little bit more involved in this now than it started out to be. It started out to be casual and fun. It's gotten to be very serious now. You know, guys spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to chase a $2,500 championship and a stupid trophy, you know, but what we do, you know, we're not the smartest bunch.
What's it feel like to actually make a pass in one of these things?
It's kind of like if you were sitting at a stoplight and you got rear-ended by a semi at about 70 miles an hour. It'll go 60 feet in about a second. At half track, which is 660 feet, eighth mile, it'll be over 200 miles an hour, about 205, and a little under 3.9 seconds. Going through the lights at 1,320 feet, a full quarter mile. Unlike the modern racing, which has been shortened to 1,000 feet, these go 1,000, and we don't have any nitro percentage limit, so they can run on 85% or 95%. These cars are a little bit more the driver has more input to these cars than a modern car. Not taking anything away from a modern car. They do demand a lot of skill, but they're very scienced out. These are kind of like a caveman car with a giant motor, you know.
So guys like Denny Milani, like you really had to be.
And those guys, remember, those guys back then, they raced every week and sometimes two different tracks in one weekend. So they learned, you know, how to make that car work. You don't get worse the more you do something, you get better. So in what I would call back in those days, the driver really was a driver. You know, he had a more integral part. Now a driver gets in a car and he can have a fair amount of talent, but he doesn't have to have a feel for the car like they did back then. Now everything is, the car is on a really well-prepared track with a really well-prepared car. It doesn't change that much until they smoke a tire, and then they got to become a driver again. But when you do that on a modern car, once you start pedaling it, there's timers involved, and the fuel system isn't in sync with the tires, and there's so much fuel volume. On this car, this is a 20-gallon fuel pump. On a modern car, that fuel pump is this big, and it pumps 110 gallons. So you start pedaling it, and if it doesn't light the fuel, it just pushes the cylinder head right off of the block. It hydraulics it off. And then there's a big fire, and everybody in the crowd goes, ooh-ah, and that's what keeps people coming back.
And that's what happened even back then too, right? These
Absolutely. Absolutely. People go to the circus not to watch the clowns. They want to see lions and tigers, and some guy maybe get eaten by a tiger. You know, you can kind of catch the front tire when you're staging the car. Pretty much once it's running, you drive it more with your butt than your eyes. You feel it go around. I mean, and you're driving it as the car is making a move. You're correcting it. And it's not like you just go for a ride like this. I mean, you're driving it most of the time, and you're on the brake. And if something goes wrong, you know, at 1,000 feet, your hand's on the parachute, you know, your head's turned. I learned that from Jim Davis years ago. You turn your head so when the oil comes, and it will come, it's going to oil one side, but you have a little bit of vision on one side. So when when the motor burns a piston, the blower pressurizes the motor. Now when you lift on the throttle, now that blower is a sucker, and it's sucking air through it, and it pushes gaskets out. And then you got oil coming on you. That's been a real big consideration in the last few years, is oil control on these motors. It was, every weekend was death-defying. I mean, danger is a relative term. It's all good until something goes wrong. And then you're in a 30-foot wide strip of concrete, slide in your oil, and it's on fire, and did I mention it's dark, It's easy to do this until something goes wrong, and then it separates the men from the boys. The guys, you see guys that restore a car, and it's really beautiful. It's way nicer than it was. But that's not an accurate restoration. And race cars get used up, they get beat up, they get run. And they are constantly in flux, they're always evolving. So you have to kind of pick a day or week, a time, that you want to restore this motor to. And we kind of did that. And this is the picture. We want to emulate this week that they ran the car, and the blower case had the little ledges on them still that they almost always machine off, because the supercharger on a GMC six-cylinder diesel engine hangs on the side. That's what that ledge is for. So they could hang it on there, then they bolted it on. Normally they knock that off because it looks prettier. But we didn't. We were pretty adamant about not over restoring things, keeping it accurate. You found the original headers hanging on the wall at Gatelli's Speed Shop, and we're going to incorporate those into the car. So you'll have pretty much the motor, pretty much the right supercharger drive, and the headers will be on it. I mean, it'll be a pretty accurate deal. I mean, it won't be running on fuel at this point, but it'll make a lot of noise, and it'll be pretty, over the top as far as, visual appeal. I mean, it's going to be a knockout, I think.
So this car is really starting to come together, not only from a design sense, but from an attitude worthy of this Gatelli dragster engine. But there's an idea here that's bigger than the car itself. It's bigger than this hot rod. It's really all about the DNA of all the souls who had a hand in putting this motor together. On a rare, sunny Sunday morning here at Half Moon Bay Drag Strip, Denny decided to come out to make a couple exhibition passes in the brand new painted number 19 car. Ted Gatelli had made a deal with the track owner, Jim McLennan, another organ grinder, to have Denny come out and make these passes. It wasn't going to be a big deal, not a full race, just some exhibition passes. And Denny always took a chance at making another fast run. So he came out with his brand new bride, Carolyn. About half the organ grinders, not very many people showed up. And that morning, the pass that Denny would make would change the world forever.
We said, well, what will we do when we die? What do you want to do? Denny said, well, I just want a plain old pine box. That's all you need to do for me. And I thought, oh, okay. So I've thought about that over many years, about the plain pine box. That's not what he got. Then the next morning, we get up really early because we're going to the track. And I got out the ironing board and I ironed my white pants so that I could be crew. And a kid named Gary LeBecq, who's infamous, came by because he was going to ride with us, and because Denny had a Cadillac, so we're driving in the Cadillac down to Half Moon Bay. So we got the Gatelli and McLennan, and they're talking to each other. And so Gatelli agrees, yes, that we will take the car and go to Half Moon Bay, and Denny will make some solo runs. And it's really exhibition. That's all it is. And that's all it was. That's all it was. Exhibition.
So he wasn't trying to break a record that morning or
Nothing. No. He was having fun driving his car, and he had a new helmet, brand new helmet, because he called himself the Wolverine, because there was the snake, the mongoose. I am the Wolverine. So he had his helmet painted by the same guy that did theirs, only it was a Wolverine. And that was the only time he ever wore that helmet, was that day. It was a creek. It was a creek, and his chute didn't come out. Of course, Alice, myself, Goat, Ted, and we went down there, and I got out of the truck, and as far as I know, the car was upright and like parked in the creek. That's how I remember it, parked in the creek. And the creek is rocks and tree limbs and that sort of stuff. I don't know. I don't think he ever turned over, but I could be really wrong. No one ever told me otherwise. But they put him in the ambulance, and I wanted to go in the ambulance, and they wouldn't let me go in the ambulance. And I kept saying, but I'm going in the ambulance. You can't go in the ambulance. So I don't remember who got me back in the truck or how that happened. Drove me back up to the track. Don Smith was there. There was a crowd around, of course, spectators. And Don told me he was dead. And I just started beating on Don Smith like my life depended on it. You're lying to me. You're not telling me the truth. One of the worst things was when we got to the hospital, and Gatelli was there. I don't remember if Alice was there. I don't think so. And I had to call Denny's parents from the hospital. And of course, they didn't know anything. They'd been out shopping for a color TV that day. We were going to watch Ed Sullivan in color. And I had to call them and say that there's been an accident. And I didn't tell them, anything more than that. We're at the Redwood Hospital in Redwood City, and come find us. And so they did. And of course, there was a priest there. And Gatelli and Denny's mother really laid into Ted. Tomorrow morning, your sons are both going to wake up. My son isn't, and I'll never get to see him again. And you get to see your sons again. And it wasn't Goat. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was Denny's parachute didn't open. Whose fault is that?
And how old were you at this point?
I was 20. Yeah.
That's a lot to go through for a 20-year-old.
Well, yeah, I thought so. But that's a lot to go through at any age. It doesn't matter. It's awful to go through.
Tell me about, what do you think? What happened after Denny passed? What did the world seem like to you?
Well, racing changed tremendously, and of course, it didn't happen overnight. It was a process. But yes, big money came in. NHRA really took over everything, and they're the ones who really brought in all the corporate money. And of course, money for the racers, which was wonderful. Everybody had sponsorships, names all over their suits and everything, instead of just funny things on their helmets. And yeah, it all changed, and it wasn't fun.
So it's been in storage at the bottom of the pile in Bakersfield for 57 years. Different places, not always in Bakersfield, but that's where it has ended up. So went to get the box and found it really, really dirty, and it hasn't been opened in all that time. So I took a knife with me down there and slipped it open just to make sure that it says Photos Denny is correct. Organ grinders, Limelette, Denny, myself, Sam. Anyhow, there's your crew right there. I called it a family portrait. That's February 21st, 1965. There's one of Gatelli Milani it's a little stained. Oh, it's Gatelli Auto Supply.
Wow. I've never seen that.
So that's the shirt that he's buried in because he had several of these. And I wanted him to have a clean t-shirt on. So that's what he's buried in. April 18th, 1965. And it's an Easter card from Denny to me. And with all my love, sweetheart. It's very sentimental. I'm sure he shopped. His mom probably bought it. But it says, love always, Denny. That's how it's signed. And that just is like, good grief. That's the first time I remember seeing his writing even.
Was he a sentimental guy?
He was not sentimental as much as he was emotional. Very emotional, but very Italian, you know. His highs and his lows, it just was crazy. Funny, laughing one minute, and, you know, he took everything to 100%. He just did. That's who he was. Swept me off my feet. Yes, he did.
August 22nd, 1965. It was the day that the music died for drag racing. It was our Don McLean moment. Ted Gatelli scooped the car back together again, put it on the trailer, took it all the way back to Gatelli's speed shop and cut it up, vowing never to run that car or that motor ever again.
Now, the part of the puzzle that we're trying to piece together is this motor that I've got. Is this the motor that was in that car that day?
I think it was. Knowing Ted and knowing what happened, Ted loaded the car up. After he got it back to the shop, he cut up the car, pulled the motor out, and quit drag racing for a while.
Right.